Hello and welcome to a pre-recorded session of the IEEE International Symposium on Digital Privacy and Social Media, being held in San Jose on the 1st of August this year. My name is Katina and I'm the Executive Chair of the Symposium, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the IEEE Consumer Technology Society for making this symposium possible. CTSOC realized that they required a transdisciplinary approach to addressing global pressing issues related to the design and development of consumer technologies, and have called for diverse stakeholders to come together to address digital privacy requirements and matters pertaining in particular to social media. I'd also like to thank for their support the IEEE Digital Privacy Initiative that's doing wonderful work within the IEEE Future Directions, and of course the IEEE Society on the Social Implications of Technology, especially the Technical Committee on Socio-Technical Systems led by Dr. Robert Abbas. Today we have with us Edgard Musafiri Mimo, a third-year systems engineering PhD student at Arizona State University. He's interested in pursuing and contributing to smart cities and technologies, more broadly in the research field of automation, machine learning, and cybersecurity for smart cities and technologies. Now, his main focus is on data privacy and security, as well as their associated risks to citizens in smart cities, and is currently exploring several risk assessment frameworks pertaining to smart city technologies, so that he can garner a better understanding of how to integrate the privacy and security component evaluation into these frameworks. Today, Edgard will be talking to us about citizen data privacy and data control in technology applications. I want to welcome Edgard and say a very good morning to you from Australia.
Hey, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon here. And good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Professor Katina, for having me here to contribute in these interesting discussions on data privacy and in the broad scope of digital privacy. And I think it is relevant to bring in the voices of citizens or users of these myriad of and countless tech applications that are being deployed. Great, yeah. So today I will really, in these few minutes, dive in the question of data privacy in tech application with the main focus of, adding on to the principles of privacy by design, methodology or approach. We know the 7 principles of, based on research of privacy by design, where privacy needs to be proactive and not reactive, where privacy needs to be a default setting that we need to command for all applications, where the privacy needs to also be embedded into the design, and the full, functionality of the technology need to have privacy embedded from the end-to-end, protection in the life cycle of the application, and especially, visibility and transparency is important, as is our 6th principle, and the 7th one is respect for user privacy. And I wanted to really drive to add the next one, where we give the users, or in this case, the citizen, the control of their data. Can that be another principle where we want to make sure that as we design all these applications and all of these systems, that users ultimately have ways to control their data? And we'll talk about the different, solutions that are being proposed. But here we want to make sure we find a way with technology to address the issues that technology has brought, to us through all this digitization of processes and systems, to make sure that we can see if we have a way to incorporate the different technological innovations and advances to see if we can get to an ultimate point where users feel not just safe and secure in the smart city through tech application, but also in charge of their data. So that's why we will be really asking a question here: how do users regain the control of their data and the data privacy in tech application? It is important when you think of this to look at and understand the scope of the different data type that are being collected, and just, you know, the magnitude of and the complexity of really thinking that users can ultimately get control of their data, because we are already lagging behind this race because we haven't incorporated this approach where we think of the user control to be one of the key aspects as we build and create this application. You can see from all these different data type and data sources that we have in smart cities, how will we be sure that we get to a point where we can identify the users' data and giving them the control back, especially now with more data being generated, some being aggregated. How do we scale that and make sure that all the big data that we are generating and handling in the smart city is reflective of the users that are contributing to it? And it is that particular key that we need to figure out. How do we, you know, allow users to feel in control and safe, and to then allow, you know, the disturbance of application that they want to be disturbed by, with privacy being, you know, the right to be left alone, or the right to only be disturbed by things or applications you want to be disturbed by. We want to make sure that users have the key to unlock their disturbance, if you may think of it that way. So here we can see the myriad ways of collecting all these different data types that makes us what is known as the big data in smart city. And this includes all the way from atmospheric data to call record to genomic data to e-commerce data to internet data to social media, smart card, internet, you name it, and the list goes on and on. And the technology is not relaxing. Technology is actually, you know, evolving by generating newer types. So it is important, before we get to a point where we locked ourselves up to this solution that we cannot really get to begin to address and really drive this key idea of how do we give the users control of their data in tech applications, knowing that their data is important to enable the smart city functions and operations. So when you look at the big data scope, there are different, you know, aspects we need to make sure we focus on. The first one there is storage. We have a lot of archive information that we will need to find a way to go back and dig into, to go back and find out if we do have some type of, you know, personal related information of particular users. And bear in mind that, you know, users migration or citizens migration in the different cities, you know, will add to the complexity of it. The people that have died will add to the complexity of it. But making sure, although they are not alive, we need to understand that their data is driving some of the data analysis and some of the, you know, the behaviors that we think the society had at that point, but those behaviors are being transcended into our current operations today. So it is very important to really focus on those, you know, archive data. And another key why we need to focus on the archive data is because, you know, most of the data regarding to citizens or to users do not really change over time. It's like your birth date information. If I'm able to get it, it does not matter whether I got it in 1990 or whether I get it in 2022. It won't change over time. So if that data is out there, that means someone has the control of it. So we need to make sure we also see that dynamic, you know, transition and the static transitions of data. There are data that changes, that are personal, but they change. Maybe your queries that you used to make 10 years ago might not be the same queries you make now, because you are changing interests, you are evolving, you are gaining new insight and new knowledge. So those things are also changing. So that really gives us a big avenue and opportunity here to begin to assess this data and begin to sort of like dissect them so that we can understand how that relates to user getting control. The next category is really the data category here. We need to make sure at a bigger scale, in the bigger black box, all the data that we are collecting in the smart city can be classified into two different categories. And those are what I named here as personal categories and impersonal categories. By personal, I mean any information that can characterize an individual. So any personal identifiable information in any of the forms that it is, whether it is in a structured form or unstructured form, as long as that information or that data can characterize an individual among many, that is a data we are really concerned about in this data privacy research and scope. So the next thing is the different kind of data types that we currently have, and the data types we are going to have, because as I said, technology is evolving, and we are aggregating some of these data types to make sure that we get the whole idea or the whole environment of data collection. And that's why you see most of the unstructured data gaining ground, because you can, the saying that says a picture is worth 1,000 words. What about the video? And what about the audio? And all of those things really reflect the dynamics that the users, have, and can really characterize users to the point where even now research is showing that you can characterize a smart city just based on some of the data, the affinities, the interests of people living in those smart cities. So that really shows us that above from a personal level, there is a collective level that we need to get to and to address, because we are addressing this issue here at a personal level, but we need a collective, solution if the city is to succeed in the view of privacy, design and user control of data. So then we have the data analysis, all the models that are being deployed, the algorithm, the STAT, the ML model, the AI behind it. All those things are coming with the understanding of previous data and some of the biasing in those data. And the question will ask, some of these data that are being generated from this algorithm and models and STAT, do they have an avenue where they can append to the data they control of the users from which the data is coming from? And that is another key aspect. And we are seeing a lot of data protection, mechanism and ideas, flowing in the smart city, which already shows that our systems are good and necessary, but they are not flawless. That means that there are some flaws and there are some issues associated with them that we are deploying some of these data protections, designs and method for. And because we have these data protection design and method, we are also thinking now that privacy will be the next big hit. And it is already happening right now, because if we are generating all this data, if we are controlling all this data, and we can't control the data enough, then we get to a point where users are going to wrestle among themselves. Do I get advantage of this service and lose on the data that is requesting me, or should I keep on my data and give away that opportunity? That is a decision that we are ultimately going to get to if we don't start addressing the issues now. And that's why we think the users need to be in control of their data, so that way they will understand the service that is being provided to them and the value that will give to them, so they can decide for themselves whether or not they want to trade their personal information with the services they are getting. And another key aspect there is the data disposal. How are we disposing some of this data? As I mentioned, we have a lot of archived data. How often do we dispose some of the data? Is releasing data in one database meaning the data is gone forever? How about the data transfer that occurs between databases? How about the different copies of databases that have been shared for various purposes? How do we get into all of this mechanism and allow users to be in control of their data? And that is what we are interested in. And that's why this next slide here, really, we are not looking at focusing on data security, although these are interdependent, but we are mainly focusing on data privacy. And that is really looking at focusing on how we collect the data, how we process the data, how we share the data, and how we archive and delete the data. And that is where the basis really comes in. But as you think of this in the context of smart city, it is essential, and I propose this citizen value-driven privacy framework, a year or a year and a half ago, about us looking at the values of these different systems or different applications that we have. And as we look at this, we are looking at the three different, axes here that you are seeing. One is the axis of data. What kind of data is enabling this tech application? It is very important to understand for each application, what kind of data is enabling it to operate. And as we know that kind of data, we ask the second question, what type of data is enabling it? Is it the personal data or impersonal data? Impersonal data being data like weather forecast or data, air quality data. Those are impersonal data because you can't really identify a specific person, with that kind of data. But any personal data need to be addressed here. And we then ask the question, why is that data needed? Why is that data, being used? What is the purpose of using that data in enabling that application? Is it to provide a service or to surveil a service? And this is where, the service and the surveillance comes in. Are we just deploying the application so that we can control people's movement? We can track, people's requests. We can predict what decision they are able to make. Or are we really just trying to provide them with an optimum way or an efficient way of performing their usual tasks? And that is what we ask. But on top of that, there is a value. There's a value axis here where we look at, is this particular technology an answer to a city problem or to a citizen's problem? And that is key, because when you begin to look at this axis now, you begin to realize, hey, there are some applications that are not really there, for the citizen. They are there for the city, to make the city operate better. They need, to understand the different, flavors or the different, user inputs, so that they can channel the city in a certain direction. And that is where we think now that data ownership and control comes in, because here these systems are surviving because the citizens are providing the data. But it will be key to now understand in this aspect what kind of personal data that is being used and who controls that data, and how does users' migration or citizens' migration from one city to the next affect the outcome of some of these systems that are being deployed. And that is something that this framework really addressed. And then by addressing this framework with these three axes, we are creating these quadrants. And these quadrants are sort of like privacy spaces. What is the privacy space of a technology in, let's say, quadrant one, and quadrant one being a technology that uses, citizens' personal data to provide citizens value for a surveillance purpose? How does that sound in a citizen's mind? We are deploying cameras everywhere for security reasons. Does that, is that appropriate for citizens? Do they have the control of where they go next? Do they have the control of not being tracked back when there's an incident that happens? And how secure are they that they are the only one that knows their whereabouts and no one else? So, and I think that is the key aspect in understanding some of these applications and classifying them in these different quadrants, so that we can then approach or regulate how much data we need this application to be collecting. And that is why it is important now to understand, as we are collecting personal data, that these personal data have different levels of sensitivity. Some data are no-go data, and some of these data are being collected without the users knowing. They are being collected without the users really putting their mind into it. Yeah, I thought I was just consenting into that one website to check the update, and all of a sudden, all my information are being shared, globally. How secure will citizens feel? How in control will they feel to be in the smart city? We look at, some of these non-sensitive categories that people are willing to share, and some of, the sensitive categories that people are not really willing to share. But yet, we do have applications in the smart city that are targeting some of this data. And that is why we think it is important to go back to this framework and begin to look at the quadrants that are using personal data and the quadrant that are using impersonal data, and to ask the next questions. How do we transition from applications that are using personal data and providing the users value to the same kind of application that will use impersonal data, but still provide the same value? Now we have two different states, a state where we are providing users with value while using their personal data, to a state where we could potentially provide them with the same value while using impersonal data. Can we get to that state? This is the move that we are trying to make here. How do we get to that state? And the question we now ask, for us to get to that state, we need the users to be involved, to really understand the transparency of privacy by design here, that we are in this space and we are trying to get to the next space where we can enable, if not all, but most of the tech application without the need to use personal data. And if we can begin to drive towards, those avenues, we can make our smart city a reality for more resilience in the future. When you look at some of the smart mobility, applications that we have in the smart city, ultimately this uses personal data to provide a service for a driven value for the city, because the city want to make sure they assess all the traffic jam, they have the required numbers of transportations, types available for people to move around the city. But we realize that this quadrant has a high privacy level because the city or some of these applications need that personal data to be able to identify, to be able to buy your bus fare, to be able to buy your next gas, some gas station. So all of this in the smart mobility system plays into this application where we can see how much migration is being made from one side of town to the next, and how that really is being interpreted for the city to understand when, with some of the predictive algorithm that we have, to understand which times are times you might need to avoid because of high traffic jams. And that is due to this behavioral habit of people in the city that is being collected over time, that is able to predict those kinds of events in the smart mobility system. The next one is smart health. Smart health here, it is very hard to provide a specific type of health requirement to a citizen here in this case for their well-being without knowing some of their health history. So these applications need to capture some of the health history, need to sort of classify individuals in different category needs so that we can be able to say or relate based on your symptom to a particular sickness and the remedies that is needed to that sickness to assess your need. And we see that also is using personal data to provide some services to citizens, but still using a lot of personal data. But some of the key, technologies in smart city which really flag with the highest level of privacy because of the surveillance component of the technologies themselves are some of the e-government technologies and the e-governance, where we want to make sure as people are voting in the city, we want to make sure that they are actually members of that city. We want to make sure that they are not, outsiders that are coming to shift the trend of the vote. So this requires a lot of ways to authenticate yourself, sometimes even needing some of your government's IDs to validate that it is you that is looking for that services. And we see a lot of these, e-government and smart government application requiring, a second, additional evidence, either being, your ID or your driver license, to be able to get access to this. But yet we still have some of, the different quadrant here with impersonal data that is providing value and services to citizens, something like smart homes, to make sure all your operations in the homes are working, optimally and efficiently using and saving energies. I think those are are good. But there's the last one that I really wanted to really get to is this idea of impersonal data surveilling citizens and still providing citizens value. These are most of the open data application and the parental consent application, because the children of today are citizens of tomorrow, and some of these then requires a lot of, it's like citizens surveilling other citizens. And I think this is another aspect that we'll have to find a creative ways in the smart city to really spend and address, because it will be critical to ensure that some of these parental consent applications are meant for the citizens' parent to surveil the citizens' children, and not the city to have a hand in how are our children education in the city happening. What kind of the apps? What kind of apps are children interested in? Should we fund some? Should we not fund others? Should we block some and allow others? And I think those are part of the data that we need to make sure we find a very good way to not be able to get some personal information out of this impersonal data to fund some of these other applications. So as you look at these things, it really pushes us to ask ourselves, what is our reality in the smart city today? The reality, it is not far-fetched. It is actually here with us. We are seeing realities with a lot of cyber attacks, a lot of security breaches, a lot of compromisions with and flaws in security by designs approach, a lot of lack of awareness, a lot of evolutions of different kind of threat with social engineering, and even more patches to respond to glitches. That is the reality that the smart city and this tech application realm or space is found itself in. And there are some solutions that are being proposed, and this solution in some part addresses the privacy question, and that is why I am listing them here. There is the anonymization approach, which is an approach where we collect the data and then we strip out all kind of data that we think are personal to users. And this has been proven to work, but has also been proven that it can be aggregated with other data and really identify individuals. So there are some, so we can say this is a loose solution, as I call it. We have pseudonism, where we're trying to collect the data and then sort of like lie or append different characteristics to the data. But still, that has also been shown to have a lot of flaws, and that can be bypassed. There is blockchain that is out there. You hear a lot of blockchain security and transparency, creating nodes where we can, with immutable data, so that way we understand, how the data is being shared. But really, it is transparent. Everyone sees whatever transaction is being made. How does that stand for privacy? But we'll use this blockchain, approach in one of the solutions that we are proposing in privacy space. And I think it is key to allow the users to have different blockchains of their data. So that way users understand how their data is being used by all these applications. And I think that will be sort of like each user having their own set of blockchains, where each application that uses their data is actually getting the consent from the users. And that's where the control comes in. And that is one idea that we are exploring. And having encryptions, a good idea for security and control, so that the users can provide their data with some encryption token, with some expiring duration, so that way the data is not just out there, and every time tech application want to use their data, they will have to, ask the users, and the users have to consent another time. And that will take us into this, big ocean where we found a lot of users signing up for many websites that they don't even remember anymore, and their data is out there in the open. And those are some of the solutions that we have. And the key problem that we have, and that I think it's a problem because it's not really reflective of what maybe the application intended for users to operate or to use is these software service agreement issues. I call them issues because they are, first of all, long, and most users don't read them. Most users are so passionate about what the application provides them that they bypass some of these things. But these things have some of the key things that we need to make sure. And I will start on the right side here with data management and ownership. When a company uses words like third party, we share your data with third party, how will the user know which third parties are going to sign up for their data? And that's why I said blockchain approach to data privacy control is key, because the users will have the ability to know how their data node is being connected, who is using my name, who is using my smart card, and for what purposes. And I think that would bring about the awareness that is needed to solve some of these data privacy issues. We look at associate and the duration, the usability of data, the archive. How do these tech applications delete the data? Most of them, they are collecting, but do the users really care about even knowing whether their data is being deleted? And how sure would they be to know that their data is being deleted? And I think that is one aspect that we need to address in this data management with software services agreement. And another ones are, the data protection, the encryption method that has been used in this data collections and the devices that are used. As data transfers from one form to the next, from one system to the next, how sure are we that the data is not being tampered with or is not being compromised? And how sure are we that the data is secured enough? So it is very important to then understand the privacy risk that the data undergoes to as it transitions from being collected with an IoT device to being transferred into the cloud through the network layers and the different interruptions that can occur as we divide packet and shift packet, and how do we make sure that as the data reaches the endpoint, it was not compromised. And I think those are some of the things that we are asking here with security issues of different devices having different security levels. I think all those things, add to the cumulative effect that data privacy is indeed needed. So we come back to our question here. How do citizens regain the control of their data and data privacy in tech application? The objective here is to really address the data privacy issue as an independent issue in smart city and disconnect that with all the interdependent issues that are associated with privacy, like security, cost, discrimination, surveillance, time, control. All these issues are associated with privacy somehow. But when you define privacy as the right to be left alone or to not be disturbed, or in other way, as the right to be disturbed by the application or the services you want to be disturbed by, then that means the real answer to these questions are the users themselves. Users need to be able to decide when they want to be disturbed and how they want to be disturbed. And with the way applications are built now, we don't have that built in. We just receive calls, we receive emails, we receive solicitations here and there, but users really most of them don't approve. And some of them have had to put up with something that we can avoid through technologies. And I think those are preferences that users can set for themselves as they download and install some of these applications. And that's where the user control of data comes in handy. Otherwise, the web of these users' privacy, data distribution and management will continue to grow until we get to a point where we cannot control what's out there anymore. So the best way to do this, as we found it, at least the way we are doing this, is to approach it in two ways. The first way is to make sure users are aware of the threats that are there and the role they have to play. And the next one is for them to be able to control. So that way they have a defined role in owning a responsibility of their privacy in this smart city space. So how do we get the user awareness? Is by sensing, surveying, understanding, giving users information about what applications are doing, the data they are collecting, how they are promised through software agreement, how they're supposed to work, what they're supposed to provide, and really show the privacy implication of the data that is being collected. And when the users are aware of these privacy implications and even get the benefit with technologies of flagging some of these implications, when I say, hey, I don't want my credit card numbers to be in the open, and I have an application that can flag me every time I'm putting my credit card numbers, then that would be a reminder for users to be like, hey, you are aware of the threat that this can cause, and here you are about to input this credit card number. Is that the right move? Then users can be in real time responding to those privacy issues, and that will help build the awareness that they need. And this is where the collaboration with the tech the tech applications organizations and companies need to really come in, but we need to make sure the users are aware of some of these risks. The next one is, how do we give them the control of data? Hey, you're about to post something for this service. We realize the security network you are on is insecure. We've had a lot of glitches. This information can be used to aggregate some other information. Do you really want to do this? And the users need to have another input or another say in whether or not the data is posted in the application or is being used in the application, and for how long. Because most of the time the threat is not in sending our data, but in storing it. If we're using the data and then getting rid of it after we've added the value, then we don't need to store it. But the city has the need to store the data so that it can build the trend. It can be able to predict. But the users do not want to build the trend. The users want to get the service. And that is where the conflict between the citizen value and the city value comes in. Because for the citizen, it's all about the here and now. I need this application for this. Once it has provided me the service, I'm done. But for the city, I want to make sure that, hey, Edgard requested 3 books last week. This week is requesting 10 books. Next week is going to request 20 books. Oh, I think we need to be prepared for him. Next time he's going to request 100 books. And I think the cities want to go at that scale. But we need to go to that scale with the user's input. Will that user that user's data be the only getting item to enable some of the technologies? Maybe not. But we cannot really answer that question unless the users gives us their preferences. And that's why this next data privacy control application is an application that encrypts the data and allow the users to be the decider of when the data is being sent, and every time the data want to be used, for the users to consent. So that way, if an application is trying to use my data and I'm not using that application anymore, I can say no to it. And this type of data privacy control will then remind users of the different applications they have installed that they have not used and that need to be deleted because they are collecting some of their data. Some of this might be, might be GIS locations. Or some of these applications don't really need the user to consent because they have consent once. But I think this consenting process needs to be every time an application is using for the users to consciously make that decision that, hey, you can continue to use my data. Otherwise, the encryption methodology can also be used to deactivate some of that access for that data. And that is really where the approach that we are taking in this roadmap to privacy control, to be able to survey, to get the user's input, to build machine learning models for the different kind of data types that we have in the smart city, and use this federated learning technique, which can then use the different settings of the users to give us a better aggregated smart city settings for our privacy and privacy levels. And by settings, I mean, should all the users in smart city chooses to flag their profile pictures as being a privacy sensitive element for the smart city. Then every time someone is trying to take a picture, upload that picture in an application on the web somewhere, they need to have a trigger to tell them, based on the general consensus, this type of data has been shown to be privacy sensitive and it has privacy implication. Do you still want to do this? The users need to say yes, or need to consent at least. Otherwise, if they are not consenting, then their data is out there, and every time their data is being used, they are not even aware that the data is being used. And that's why, with building this survey and this federated learning, we hope to provide an architecture framework that will sort of like, provide an envelope of the data communication part for any post request that the users are making on the web or in their mobile apps. And hopefully that will build this privacy awareness application for the users to understand what data is being required of them and what services is being provided to them for what kind of value. And if the value exceeds the importance of their information, then the users will decide what's best for them. And at this point, they're going to have to deal with privacy control and really control what tech applications are doing with their data. And I think once we get to that place, we will have a good privacy by design, principle to add that gives users the control of their data back. And that is really what our work here entails and what we are working on. So if you have any questions, please go ahead.
Edgard, what a comprehensive presentation that was on privacy by design in smart cities. I'm not sure, at the beginning I mentioned to the audience that you are actually a national research training student funded by the National Science Foundation in citizen-centered smart cities and smart living at Arizona State University. And it's wonderful to see projects from systems engineers who are understanding the importance of this topic. Cities are certainly paying attention. We have representation from various cities and counties in California at the forthcoming conference on the 1st of August. And this kind of research is pertinent. A lot of naysayers, Edgard, would say, don't be silly. Users don't have time to tell you about their preferences. They're swimming in data, and this is not a plausible solution. What is your response to that?
Well, the response is clear. They are swimming in data. They are swimming in their data. And the key aspect here is to say to the naysayer is, we're not only looking at the benefit that we are reaping now, but the benefit we hope to reap in the long term with technologies and the different applications. And the value of the technologies that are being provided now might seem to be better for the moment, but in the long term, when the users have to scale the amount of their information that is out there in the open, and the fact that they cannot have control to say to anyone about whatever information is about them, they might not deny it. They might not deny their birthday. They might not deny their gender or their credit card or their physical address history, because it's data that is there in the open. Now they cannot deny. So we get to a point where users will have to either rebel against the city or really being frustrated with themselves and feel powerless. And we don't want to face that consequences. That's why we want to be proactive in this approach to begin to create avenues for users to opt into this data control. And I am sure if we are proposing these solutions for the users, most of them we want to have control. The problem is most applications that are providing values today and benefiting with some of this data will not want to be at the point where they have to wait on someone in order to execute or to finalize their algorithm and their analysis. And I think that is the fact we'll have to face, and the city need to play into that, and the citizen need to be the deciders, because ultimately the citizens do run the cities.
It's a fascinating perspective, particularly when you're looking at the sensitivity of data, which you alluded to several times in your presentation, and particularly health data that can be determined by non-health systems now. You know, surveillance cameras can look at someone's gait, can look at someone's location habits, whether they frequent, and make assumptions and inferences based on this information coming together. How often should users be able to buy in to whether they share sensitive data or not? That threshold, is it annually? Is it semi-annually? Is it every 20 years? Data retention being the prime issue here. How do you see that?
And that is why I think how often one will really be determined by the value that is being proposed to them. It's how it is every time I think the value of the proposition that is being given to me as a user from the application exceed what my information really means to me. The problem now is the information is out there to the point where we are seeing systems as more valuable than information they possess, which is, you know, something that should be really reverse engineered to be for you know, application makers to really think that without the information, the application really means nothing, because the services that they are being able to provide to the citizens is based on the input that the citizens really put in. If they are getting garbage data, they won't provide efficient or proficient services. So the input of the data need to be, you know, sound for the services and the value to be sound. Now, when the users begin to acknowledge and are aware of the value of their data, that's when the real factor really comes in. The problem we are facing right now is people are swimming in data, they are swimming in services, they are experiencing new dynamics and new feelings with the different approach, the different ways that optimization and efficiencies are being displayed. But we're going to get to the point where the users are going to get used to experience all these services, to the point where they're going to ask, hey, what is enabling all these services? And when they realize that it is their data, when they realize that they are talking to a kiosk that knows all about them and some information that they hardly remember, then they're going to ask the question, am I really, you know, in control of my space? Can I choose to be not disturbed? Now, when they realize they cannot really do that, and they don't have a way to do that, they are going to fight back and rebel against some of these technologies. And because there is an evolution of technologies, there is also an evolution of people adopting technologies and really thinking and asking questions about the purpose of those technologies and the intentions of those technologies. And that is why we are flagging now these issues of privacy, because people are feeling with these, you know, cyber attacks that are coming, they are feeling that the security is not enough. We need a better security. Now, what will happen when the privacy will be the hotspot? What will the citizen do? And I think that is the question of value, where the citizen might say, hey, I don't even use that system. I don't care if it is operational in the city or not, just take it down. We don't want to get to that point. We want to get to a point where we can still allow others to use the system because they are benefiting values out of those systems. And whenever I need to get the same value, I can then provide the same information for a specific duration of time, not forever.
So what you're saying is it's ultimately a personal choice at the individual level, not even household, it's per person. And yes, how we navigate that space over time will be very interesting. I think data is currently being used to control individuals, and you're trying to flip this and saying the users must regain that control back. The interesting thing is that wrestling that's occurring between private corporations and cities and states, for that matter. You know, law enforcement generally have access to a lot of information on citizenry for legitimate reasons. It's proportional, whereas perhaps private organizations may be collecting data and going on fishing expeditions on what could potentially be useful to them to further manipulate or exploit citizenry. How does Citi work with private corporations? And do you think in managing digital privacy of citizenry, Citi has to work closely with the industry? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think the city should have an agenda that is driven by the citizens themselves. Because the problem here we sort of like have a bigger gap between what the private sectors are doing as far as the kind of technologies and the kind of innovations that are happening there and that they are planning and focusing to deploy in the city, to the goals and the policy and the roadmap of the cities. Sometimes the cities are lagging behind, and most of the time they are usually lagging behind in understanding the technologies, in really trying to figure out what value those technologies will give to citizens. And I think the struggle is because in the private sectors, things are dynamic. While in the social sciences and in the city roadmap, things are almost static to the point where we are planning a roadmap for 10 years, for 20 years, for 30 years. We're like, hey, we need to maybe deploy Wi-Fi and whatever. But then in 10 years, Wi-Fi might not even be Wi-Fi anymore, because the tech and the private sectors are going through innovation. And if we find a better solution, we can tell the city, hey, this deployment of Wi-Fi in all the public areas is not a better technology. We have these newer technologies, maybe a combination of Wi-Fi with whatever, NFC or whatever, to that provide us this better avenue. So we see now the cities trying to understand what that really means for them, not just for their current need, but also for the future need. They don't really know where the private sector is taking them as far as technology is concerned. All they know is the need and the focus on the growth based on the current values that they have. And some of those predictions are based on archive data. So we build based on archive data, and the citizens that might consent or might send their preferences might not even be in the city in the next 10 years. So we are left with children growing up into these smart cities with decisions that their past generation made for them. And now most of these children too, some of them are in the tech field, they're already looking forward. So we have a city being divided with folks that are looking at the current need, some that are looking at the trend of what changes happen in the past, and a few of them that are trying to understand what really the city should expect in the future. So in that case, the city needs to have an agenda that is both a present agenda and a futuristic one. A futuristic one, that means an agenda that is open to say, we have our stand where we want to put the citizens at the center of our agenda. So we want the citizen to be able to chime into whatever technologies will be developed that will provide them value. So we want to make sure the tech or the private sector understand these values of citizens that we don't want to compromise on. Regardless of whatever funds and money that and businesses that the tech companies and the private sector is anticipating, we need to have those values that we can say, we don't want the privacy of an individual living in our city to be infringed because we have millions of market to make. And I think that is the agenda that the citizen and that the city need to bring to the private sector, so that the private sector will now engage with citizens to really make sure that the technologies they are producing won't have a repercussive impact on the citizen. And I think that is the approach that the city should really take, and not go to the private sector and then coming back with the agenda that, hey, we anticipate in 2030, these are the technologies you'll be facing. No, they need to make sure they understand what the citizens, values will be of those futuristic, solutions. And I think once they bridge that gap, we'll be able to get good systems.
I think the line for me of the whole presentation was users need to get involved. That's what you
Yes.
said.
Yes.
And tell us, how will City involve users? What does that look like? What's that called? What's that process?
Yeah, I mean, that process is really I would say an open-mindedness of what's happening there. I understand in the tech sector, in the private sector, there's a lot of regulation, a lot of IP-related information that's really tech companies don't want to share because that is their next big hit. But we need to find a way to prepare citizens on what is coming ahead. And I don't really know what that looks like, but I think it is important to engage in we preparing this technology. How do we get people ready in assessing these technologies now that we know that they will be impacted regardless or not? It's like social media is here now. Yes, we can accept it. Some can disagree, they don't really need it, but it's here. The reality is it's here. Were we prepared? Maybe someone have been taken by surprise by it because they were not prepared. But I think City need to really drive into this preparation phase where they can say, we have a roadmap, we have a lot of opportunities and research that are being made in these private sectors, and we think the citizen better start learning about the different coin word, nomenclature word. Hey, what is blockchain? What is cryptocurrency? What is encryption? What does that really mean to the scale, so that the citizen can be able to say, hey, I might not need blockchain. I don't think that's right. So that they can then begin to gauge the citizen and begin to better present what's valuable for the citizens to the private sector.
If we look at social media for a moment and the way some smaller organizations have been harnessing, for example, material that is publicly available. We know, for example, small organizations have been able to harvest 10 billion images from the internet, literally web scraped off the internet, and then used in some jurisdictions to support policing investigations and other law enforcement practices. What do you feel in contexts like that? What is the way we are going? Is it specific to a particular city, region of what's acceptable and what's not? Is it wrong? Is it a human rights issue? Where do we gauge these kinds of capabilities now that are coming in through machine learning and the ability to store things on the cloud, for example, and then apps on the cloud?
Yeah, I definitely think, we are rendering or making users powerless. And that is the key word in my mind, really, rendering them powerless. We might be sitting here, we don't know who our images were. And it's really that aspect of control. We are not in control of some of the information. Just because we visited the website, just because we tried to download an app, we are not in charge of that information. And that is a bigger problem because it's really infringing our privacy right. It's really causing us a lot of problems, and we are having now to even have recommendation systems based on our habit. So we have systems that now can compete with what we actually need. System that knows us better than ourselves. So it's like we are going to get to a point where if we don't really approach this issue right now, we're going to get to a point where even the technology makers will get to a point where the system will be controlling them. To the point where if we cannot control our data, how sure are we that the people in charge of this system are actually in control of the system? What happens when data center goes down? What happens when the data is being lost? What happens when a cyber attack is being hit on those data? Then who controls the data? And we don't really want to give someone or an individual or an organization that much power to be in control of people's data, even when people don't even know that their data is out there. And that's why I think with social media, it is important for us to involve users. And by involving them is to show them the risk, the privacy risk and the privacy implication that their data has. To show them that, hey, through a quick video camera, do a quick tape, you might be at risk of this. We have a lot of facial recognition systems. We have a lot of biometrics, authentication. How am I sure that someone won't unlock the next big, account with my face on? How am I not sure that someone are going to use my credential to do some bad things out there? And I think since law enforcement is being involved in some of these things, it is important to understand the misrepresentation of data. That Edgard can get hold of Katina's data and then act as Katina's. And because the system knows about Katina's and I have the data, and then the system knows what to recommend. And that's why recommendation systems are great as far as e-commerce is concerned, but they are also so bad about what some other security systems are concerned. And I think when users begin to understand that they are not really themselves, they can be here in Arizona, but someone in Russia can be doing their work, someone in Australia, in South Africa. And I think it is really very chaotic, because we are going to get to a point, if we don't address this now, we are going to reach to a point of a digital identification problem. How am I sure that regardless of the IP address of a computer, how am I sure that it was me who was controlling it? So we get to those identification problems if we don't face these privacy problems right now.
So Edgard, well said. I leave you with one question.
Yes.
I've asked this of all the interviewees and presenters so far at the symposium. If you had one message for Silicon Valley, what would it be?
I think the message is clear. Get the user involved. And if they can get the user involved in whatever way, in pushing this privacy agenda for users to get their feedback, in trying to maybe show them some of the dangers that we are seeing even on the security front, and show them what they anticipate the privacy agenda will be. Some of them we've talked about them here. Some of them we are willing to talk and explore in more detail about the specific privacy cyber attacks that are coming. Those that will validate the authentication system but still infringe on users' privacy. Those are the attacks we need to be looking forward, and the cities need to make sure they get the experts together and need to make sure that they challenge some of our educational systems, some of our free learning platform, to begin to really share this news with as many folks and citizens as we can, so that we all can bring about our personal concerns, because privacy is the first and foremost a personal issue, but the smart city need to find a collective answer for it.
Well, thank you very, very much for that answer, Edgard. You're with the IEEE International Symposium on Digital Privacy and Social Media. We've just heard a wonderful contribution from Edgard Musafiri Mimo from Arizona State University. If you're interested in these topics, we'd love you to register for the 1st of August conference in-person event in San Jose at the Marriott Hotel. Again, thanks to CTSOC, IEEE Digital Privacy, and IEEE SSIT. If you'd like to find out more about this presentation and other pre-records, please visit our website. And if you'd like to become a member of CTSOC or any of the other committees or initiatives or societies, visit these website addresses. Once again, thank you to Edgard for his time in preparing this presentation, and a vital contribution from an academic voice, and one that I hope will find its way into industry in one of these big tech corporations. Thank you again, Edgard.
Thank you, Katina.